Luke 15, to get our gears going, let me read this quote, old quote. Some of you may have heard this before. A.W. Tozer once said, "What comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us." What comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. What do you suppose he means when he says that? What comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. What do you suppose he meant by that?
Maybe that's what you think God is.
Okay, that's what you think God is, what you think God is like. And really, everybody has some kind of concept of God. Even the most passionate atheist would say, well, here's how I would understand God if he did exist, and this is why I reject that notion. I mean, so everyone has some kind of thought of God. So go ahead, Ryan.
It's that, plus it's how you relate to him. So who he is, how you relate to him, and what that means.
Yeah. I think a little bit of what he's saying, and maybe this is everything he's saying, but at least part of what he's saying is, hey, what we think about God is really important for who we are and how we understand our lives and how we live our lives. Like, you could argue nothing is more important, nothing's more impactful, nothing is more consequential than how we view and understand and relate to God, right? And I think we would all agree with that. And so one of the things that we've been looking at in this study of Luke 15 is that it helps us zero in on just exactly what is God like and cut through the fog that so often, in our own minds, we have our own blinders and misconceptions. And then, of course, the world around us is constantly sending messages that are confusing, mixed messages about God. And then even the church often, I think, is less than clear regarding the heart of God. And one of the reasons for that is because we can miss the heart of God because we're so focused on a moralistic framework. And this parable helps to illustrate that really well. It's not the only thing that it teaches, but it's one of the important things it teaches. And we see that with this whole dynamic of, okay, here's God and what he's like, and there's the prodigal and there's the prude. Like these two kind of extremes, these two examples or expressions of rebellion we see in the prodigal son and the prude, the younger son and the older son, the younger brother and the older brother. So we're going to go more into that. But just as a reminder, to set the context, before the parable of the prodigal son, you have the parable of the lost sheep and the parable of the lost coin. So the lost sheep is the one where it says, hey, if a man has 100 sheep and one has gone astray, doesn't he leave the 99 and go after the one? And then the next one is about the woman who has this precious coin, and if she loses it, she goes and does everything she can to try to find it, like she's frantically trying to find it. So what is it about God's heart that Jesus is teaching through the lost sheep and the lost coin? What do those things say about the heart of God?
And everybody's important right down to individually.
Okay, everybody's important to God. He values people. If a person is lost, he wants them to be found. And it's not like just, hey, they're lost and they don't know where they are, but like they're lost in separation from him, right? And he is eager to win people back, to find people. Anything else we would say about it? Does that cover it?
It closes the gap.
Closes the gap. Can you elaborate, Greg?
So there's space between me and the coin.
Mm-hmm.
The coin's not going to move. There's space.
It's not going to come find me.
No, there's space between me and the sheep.
Mm-hmm.
Sheep's lost. Obviously, he's now looking for me.
Mm-hmm.
So he closes the gap that's been created by that loss.
Yeah, good. And we've seen that from the beginning, haven't we? With Adam and Eve in the fall, they didn't go looking for God. He went looking for them. He is a seeker in that sense, right?
Jeff, that song we sang last week,
Yeah.
the final verse, the new song, Jesus Strong and Kind, it says that last verse, he said, if I'm lost, he'll come to me.
Yeah.
We could run to him, but initially he comes, like that song says that.
Yeah.
We're lost, he comes to us.
Yeah. I mean, we could sit and soak in that for quite a while, couldn't we? Because that's encouraging. I mean, when we're in touch with ourselves and what we experience in life and how often we can be calloused or how often we can be delusional and not seeing what's true and not feeling like God is involved in what we're going through, This notion that, hey, God is taking an active role in this, that He is pursuing us, is really encouraging, isn't it? So, all right, so those are the two preceding parables. Now we get into the parable of the prodigal son, and we're going to read it again, and we're going to focus in on two sections within it. One about the younger son, one about the older son. But let's just, by way of reminder, for those people who weren't with us last week, can we just kind of summarize again and you've got some help on the board here, if you can make sense of my otherwise cryptic notes on the board, but what do you remember about the prodigal? What did he do and why? Let's start with the prodigal. So then it says the story goes, this man who is a relatively wealthy man, he has two sons, the younger and older. Prodigal is the younger. What do you remember about the prodigal? What did he do and why?
He was self-focused and he wanted all his money and went out and wasted it.
Okay, that kind of sums it up. Self-focused, wanted his money, went out and wasted it. Asked for his inheritance early so that he could, immediate gratification, here and now, go and spend it and have a grand old time, have a party, right?
You know
Okay.
what kind of surprises me about that?
Go ahead.
A little bit of the story is that when it's all said and done and he's, had his party time and the money's gone, that instead of just running right back home, he spends time with the pigs. I don't...
It's perplexing to you?
That doesn't compute with me as the kind of personality that he was. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I think a little bit of the answer we can get from what we're going to focus in on in a minute. So hold that thought.
Okay.
Let's remember that. Okay, so he goes out, he has a good time, and he ends up choosing to work in the pigsty there, feed pigs, and even eating their food. And it's the question, okay, why didn't he just go back immediately? Why did he? So let's hold that, and then let's talk for a minute about the Prude, what we remember about him, the older brother. Okay, so what do you remember about what he did, and sort of what motivated what he did? So, let me fill in the gap a little bit. So the prodigal does that, right? So then he goes home, and the father receives him and throws a big party and all of that to welcome the younger son home. And then the older son, the Prude, what's his response? What did he do? What's he say?
He's jealous. Why didn't you do this for me? I stayed here and done faithfully everything you wanted.
Yeah.
And I want to look good, basically.
Right. I was the dutiful, good son. Right. Yeah, Jack.
I didn't get my bill.
Yeah.
He's still seeing things in a finite space. There's finite resources. It's coming out of my pocket.
Like, he's thinking about his dad's assets.
Yeah.
He's like, okay, you've already given this kid half. Now he comes home, and so everything he does, everything he costs you, he costs us at this point.
And
That's
just
part of
to
that.
the previous comment, the son doesn't come home either because he's still thinking finitely because he thinks, I blew the resource that was there.
Yeah, maybe that's part of it.
Come back to.
Yeah, it's part of it. And we'll go there in a minute. Ryan brought up, this is funny, we were talking about the men's meeting the other day. He literally says, hey, you never gave me a goat. And we're like, what's the big deal about the goats? And I told them a story. It's kind of funny. We're on vacation. One of the places, friends of Jill's parents in Pennsylvania, they live on a farm and they have a pool. And we went on a hot day to swim, actually twice. And they have goats. And the kids were enthralled with these goats. And they had a little baby goat. And that was like the most popular of all. And so I don't know what it is. I didn't go anywhere near the goats. I just stayed by the pool. But
Little goat. That's like a real party.
apparently that's the thing you need. Like, if there's no goat, there's no party, right? Let's face it. So yeah, goats are a big deal. So he says, you never gave me a goat. Obviously, in that day, culturally, like, this had to do with, right, their resources and all of that. But anyway, I digress.
Sorry.
Ryan, you and I enjoyed that part of the conversation, at least. Whether everyone else did or not, we don't know. But okay, so the Prude, he's jealous, he's angry. Okay, so that's a little reminder. Let's do this. Let's read it. And as I read, I want you to think about this, all right? I want you to think about, as I read, think carefully here. What does this story tell us about this guy, the prodigal's view of God. What do his actions say? What do they imply about his view of the character of his father? And the same with regard to the older brother. What is his response? What does it imply about his view of the character of the father? So that's what I want you to think about.
I think the prodigal thinks that he doesn't have to earn his father's love, that it's just there.
Okay, well, let's see. Hold that thought. So Susan's saying, well, I think he doesn't think he has to earn his love. So let's see. So let's read it and let's just pay attention to those two aspects of the story. All right? And I'll go ahead and read it. Start at verse 11. I'll go all the way to 32. Just try to give some thought to that as I'm reading. Okay. It says, and he, Jesus, said, a man had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of the estate that falls to me. So he divided his wealth between them. And not many days later, the younger son gathered everything together and went on a journey into a distant country, and there he squandered his estate with loose living. Now when he had spent everything, a severe famine occurred in that country, and he began to be impoverished. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed swine. And he would have gladly filled his stomach with the pods that the swine were eating, and no one was giving anything to him. But when he came to his senses, he said, How many of my father's hired men have more than enough bread, but I am dying here with hunger? I will get up and go to my father, and will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven, and in your sight, I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me as one of your hired men. So he got up and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion for him and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven, and in your sight I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his slaves, Quickly, bring out the best robe, put it on him, put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf, kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For the son of mine was dead and has come to life again. He was lost and has been found. And they began to celebrate. Now his older son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. And he summoned one of the servants and began inquiring what these things could be. And he said to him, Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf, because he has received him back safe and sound. But he became angry and was not willing to go in. And his father came out and began pleading with him. But he answered and said to his father, Look, for so many years I have been serving you, and I have never neglected a command of yours. Yet you have never given me a young goat, so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your wealth with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him. And he said to him, Son, you've always been with me. All that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, for this brother of yours was dead and has begun to live. He was lost, and he's been found. Okay. It almost tripped me up for a second there reading, because I'm picturing a young goat with a party hat on. Ryan, for some reason, Ryan put that picture in my head on Wednesday, and it's not left my head. Anyway, what does this story reveal about the prodigal's beliefs? What is he believing about the character of his father? Because he says he squanders the money, right? He spends it all on partying, and his brother accuses him of prostitutes and so on, and that's probably what happened, but we don't know for sure, but that's the accusation, right? So he loose living, he throws it away, and then he ends up completely bankrupt, and he's feeding pigs, and he's like gladly filling his stomach with the pods which the pigs eat. And it says no one was giving anything to him. No one was giving anything to him. That's interesting. We could stop there and unpack that for a bit. Is he receiving mercy? Not really. He's kind of like kicked while he's down, in a sense, right? Okay.
Well, and it also starts with him telling his father, give me.
Yeah. So what does he probably, I mean, if he has clarity, do you think he maybe feels some guilt, or like he remembers demanding that, right? I mean, that happened.
One would think.
One would think. And he remembered the way he says, like, look, okay, it says he comes to his senses. In my translation, it's literally he came to himself. It's like he wasn't himself for a bit, then he became, okay, wait a minute, he starts thinking more clearly, and he says, well, hey, at least my father's hired servants have enough bread. So I'll go back and I'll be a what? I'll be a servant. So stop right there. What does that tell you about his view of his father?
Transactional view of his relationship then. But there is no relationship.
I mean, it's definitely a more distant relationship, and he's I don't believe he's expecting what happens. Now, it's a parable, it's not an actual historical person, but like just knowing what we know about human nature, if this were a actual story about what happened to an actual individual, what would likely be going through his mind is, hey, I've kind of blown it. Like, I've blown it, and at this point, I'm just hoping to get my foot back in the door, and maybe I can just be a servant, and he's going to have to be, I mean, he's got to be upset with me. It's probably going to take a long time to, like, find my way back into his good graces, so I'll just go and be a slave for a while. At least I'll have a roof over my head and food in my mouth.
You sort of start thinking, like, I won't take me back, so chances are he's not going to take me back. I mean, but it's the last ditch.
That's really an interesting way of looking at it. Boy, yeah. And I don't know, we said last week we can all identify with probably both of these individuals at different seasons of our lives, sometimes the same season, just in different moments of our we can relate and identify with both. I know I've had that thought, like clear moments of seeing how guilty and shameful I've been. It's like, gosh, I wouldn't take me back. Probably some of you have had that thought, maybe all of you have had that thought.
So it just piggybacks, but it's almost like, okay, I can kind of depend on justice maybe, his sense of what's just, his sense of what he thinks is right for him to do, but I don't know if I'm going to get any mercy necessarily.
He's definitely not banking on the mercy.
Yeah, I'm going to hope that he thinks it's right to deal with me a certain way.
So let's back up and then come back to that spot. So backing up, when he asked for the inheritance now, what does that say about how he's viewing living in the household there? He feels like he's being deprived in some way, right? And he probably feels like, well, there's more out there that I could be enjoying. This is holding me back. He's certainly not appreciating the value of being in that household, the privilege that it is, the abundance he has. He is not seeing that clearly. So then again, you fast forward to here, he's like, with all this in the background, he's like, okay, well, maybe I can get back in. It wasn't so bad after all. Maybe I can get back in and just hope to be a hired servant in that status.
I think what he does is like animals do. The grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. And then he goes on the other side of the fence and finds it's not greener pastures.
Yeah.
And so now he's going to go home and try to get back and have something of what he left.
Yeah. And even in that, there's this exposure of how he views God, and he certainly doesn't expect the kind of response he gets, which tells you his understanding was misinformed. He was mischaracterizing his father. We clear that like there's almost nothing more important about us humans than how we understand our father. And if he was guilty of mischaracterizing his father, do you not think that we can all be and have all been guilty of mischaracterizing our father? And if he was thinking in a more, well, one, he's holding out on me, the pleasure I should really have, like Adam and Eve, kind of brings them to mind also. But then along with that, well, okay, and if I'm going to get back into his favor, if I'm going to have a place of favor with him, I'm going to have to kind of earn my way back.
Don't we kind of base then what we think of someone else, like our father, on our own opinion of ourselves. You know, what we think of ourselves, we're portraying onto the Father.
Well, so let's tease that out.
I wouldn't be merciful, so he probably isn't.
Yeah, let's tease it out. I mean, I think that's true. I think part of the reason that we mischaracterize God is because we project onto God the way we tend to think. And if it were my kid, I'm going to be honest with you. If they insulted me by just basically saying, hey, I want your money, I'm not all that interested in the relationship, and then they went and made a complete disaster of their lives, I mean, look, I'd be lying if I said, part of me isn't saying, hey, you know what, you made your bed, lie in it. Because that's human nature. And that's what we're like. And so then we assume, well, that... But the difference is the difference. There's a big difference. The difference is the difference. Yeah, Jack.
So, I mean, I guess there were still a lot of consequences to this kid's decision,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the inheritance is gone, right? Not the relationship, but the inheritance is likely gone.
Yep.
So,
Go ahead.
so I'm just from that perspective, like your child goes and does that,
Mm-hmm.
wastes all their money, comes back. As much as you can restore potentially a good relationship, there are symptoms or there are consequences to the decisions that you make.
Yeah, and one
It goes
consequence
beyond
is...
what it says there, though. We don't know that's true.
Well,
I could make his money back.
Exactly. That's what we don't know is the future potential. But we do know that stuff is gone. It's not coming back. That finite amount is gone. We can say that much.
But I just, like traditionally,
Mm-hmm.
there was an inheritance. You look at things handed down through the generations.
Mm-hmm.
It was split
Mm-hmm.
between the children, right? And it talks about that repeatedly. So, I mean, I just make the assumption this guy's asking for it early, and the father says he splits it and gives him his share.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't say there was more shares. And so I just don't read into that it was fully restored from that. The child now was a full member as far as possession, but it kind of highlights the individual relationship with the father.
But see, what we're doing though is, and I think that's true in the horizontal or the human sense. But like, remember that this is a fictional story to say something about God, and the Father represents God the Father, of course, and God the Father's resources are not limited. And so, to Ryan's point, if you stay in the finite realm, hey, look, you don't get the sense that the dad is real worried about his resources running out, right?
An inheritance humanly presupposes that guy, you're supposed to wait till he dies, right? He's not going to make any more money. That's the estate. It is what it is when he dies.
Mm-hmm.
But he comes back and the father's still alive. The father's he's not sitting on his laurels. You would assume he's continuing to have a prosperous farm and do his thing. There's more money being made.
Right, and again, to not lose like the main point, like there's not lack here. Okay,
Yeah.
So maybe the humanly that he's thinking that or worried that, but there is. Okay.
So, 60,000 foot level, if this is about God, right?
Yep.
The Father is God.
Mhm.
So, 60,000 foot level, God's so totally other that sometimes I put it in one word that it's weird. Right? So the God that's portrayed here is the same God that says, hey, if you work for 1 hour in my field, you're going to get as much as the guy that worked for 8 hours.
Yeah.
So it's like, I don't think I can make an assumption as to how God's going to divvy this out.
So what about the young man maybe coming back and not having the value? He spent that, now he sees the importance of that money is not as important as he thought, so maybe he's got, through this, he changed his mind and has a different view, and is not as interested in the money as he is the relationship.
So I would say that's getting back to kind of the core of this, and I would take it one step beyond and say, let's look at the Father now and what he does and what that says. Because whether that son realized that or not, whether he was really thinking, which again, it's a fictional character, so it's kind of, in some ways, like, it's not really the point. But let's just for fun say, hey, maybe he's thinking, hey, you know what, I've come to learn that the stuff doesn't matter that much. The money doesn't matter. Like, I need a relationship with my Father. it doesn't seem like that's really what he's going back for when he just says, I want food and a shelter, basically, is what he's going back for. But look what the way the father responds. When he sees him, and it says, and I talked about this last week, like culturally, for a man to hike up his tunic and expose his legs and run to his kid, it's kind of like a humiliating thing. It would be a way of humbling himself. In fact, if the older brother were watching this, it would add insult to injury. He's already not happy about it. He's like, are you serious? Like, you're going to humble yourself, Dad, before this jerk son of yours? You should kick him out of here. You should tell him never to come home back again. But that's it. But he doesn't do that. The father runs to him. He's eager to embrace him. In keeping with the parable of the lost sheep and the lost coin, he's showing that, hey, he was lost, he's found. He was dead, he's alive. And what does that say? Hey, life is in the relationship. He was depart from me, he was dead. Now he's with me. He's alive again. And this is what the father says to the older son later. You're with me. All that is mine is yours. Like, this is now to look at the spiritual again, this is the infinite resources of the loving Father saying, hey, this is what I've wanted all along for my family. This is what I've wanted all along for my kids. This is the redemption of what was initially desired by the Father. And he's not waiting. He is not waiting for the son to grovel, for the son to offer to pay him back, for the son to say, Dad, I'll work my tail off and I'll do whatever I can to... He is just, it's full embrace. It is a picture, it's a beautiful, astonishing picture of grace. It's grace. That is the heart, the overflowing heart of God is grace. Free, in a way, reckless grace. That's why I love that book, The Prodigal God, where Tim Keller plays off the word prodigal. Says, we think of this guy as the prodigal. Well, that word means one who just spends like recklessly. The Father's spending recklessly. It's reckless grace. So he, at the very best case scenario, the prodigal minimized the grace of his father and was surprised by grace. And so then when it says the son's reaction to the grace he receives is this further softening of his heart relationally, where he says, Father, I've sinned against heaven and in your sight. I'm not worthy to be called your son. He realizes in this world, when he was in the pigsty, no one was giving him a thing. And he doesn't deserve a thing from his dad. He doesn't deserve one more penny. And he doesn't deserve relationship. And the father just pours it. Bring out the best robe, put it on him, put a ring on his hand, sandals on his feet, bring the fattened calf, kill it, let us eat and celebrate. A son of mine was dead, he's come to life, was lost and found. Okay, yeah, Dave, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was just thinking that picture of the dad going after his son. Right, it says he saw him from afar off, so like he's, like it sounds like he's looking, like he's standing there, like, I'm just thinking like modern day, like guy standing on his front porch, like looking out in the distance, just waiting, watching, hoping that his son's going to come back.
Yeah.
And then when he glances and he sees him in the distance, and he doesn't wait for his son to come to him.
Yeah.
He runs to his son.
To him.
And that's telling of God's heart, that he's not passively waiting for people to come to him.
Right.
You know what I mean? He's going after the wreckage. And
He doesn't even wait for his son to come and apologize or anything. Like, there's no expectation or no.
And there's already this train of blessing that he's bringing with. Like, he's like this whole cascade of love and grace that is traveling in the direction of his son.
Yeah.
And just even before even all that stuff, just the scene of the father running to the son is incredible.
Yeah.
I feel like the son has a little bit of an idea of the grace that his dad has, because he isn't afraid to go back. I mean, he goes back thinking the grace he'll get is that he'll be given food and shelter. But it's like thing after thing is like expanding the grace. Is the father waiting there for him, and then doing these? And this is like to Jack's point. I think there's a point humanly where we can have that, but there's nothing in this story that says God's like that. Like he doesn't just take him back. He takes him back as a son, and then he's like treating him like this honored guest. Why wouldn't he just keep and your inheritance is restored, and you're like, it's like everything, and it's so much grace, and it's got to be for him, almost shameful for him. Like, why is he doing all this? Like, I would count myself lucky just to have a place to sleep and not have to eat big food.
Yeah.
And it's like, too much. It's too much. Yeah. How does that son even handle all this? Like, it's got to be difficult for him even to accept, like, how much grace the Father is giving him.
Yeah. So let's keep going with the older son. Okay. So in this section, let's see. Let's pick it up in verse 25. And I'll read that again, and let's talk about the older son. Okay. Older son was in the field. He came and approached the house, and he heard music and dancing. And, thinking, what the hell is this going? What's going on here? He summoned one of the servants and began inquiring what these things could be. He said to him, "Your brother has come. Your father has killed the fattened calf because he has received him back safe and sound." But he became angry and was not willing to go in. His father came out and began pleading with him, but he answered and said to his father, "Look, for so many years I have been serving you. I have never neglected a command of yours, yet you have never given me a young goat so I might celebrate with my friends. When this son of yours came and was devoured your wealth with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him." So what does this tell you about the older son's view of the father? How is he understanding the character of the father?
That if you do what he wants, he's going to give you something.
Who's been the more obvious rebel here in this story?
Probably him, because he has the attitude of, I worked for this, I deserve it.
Okay, before this point, though.
Yeah.
Before this point, who's been the more obvious rebel?
The younger one.
Well, it's interesting he uses the word like that. He talks about exert and worked up and everything, blah, blah, blah. Basically recognize the fact that his father's been serving him his whole life, essentially like giving to him, pouring out to the son. I mean, that's not even recognized. It's like, look at what I did for you, like I've done all this stuff. And meanwhile, the father's just gushing with service and gifts for the son that the son's even recognized. And that's parenting right there. It's like, my kids are even like I ask him to take out the trash and it's like, and I'm like, all right, I just, made dinner, cleaned up all the dishes, worked full day of work, and doing all this other stuff, and I'm sorry that taking out the trash is too hard for you.
How have you told him that?
I usually do. It's a lot more colorful.
I can't relate to that at all, Dave. My kids are always, "Dad, what can we do to help?" They do sometimes do that. And sometimes they don't. Sorry, kid.
Jeff, I have a question.
Yeah.
Like back in verse 12 where it says he divided it between the two of them, does this mean that the older brother actually has his inheritance right then in his hands? It sort of sounds like it. Like if he wanted, he could, I don't know if that's the case. It sounds like he could have gone and squandered.
The way I've always heard this taught is like, and I don't, again, because it's fictional and it's just a parable, I don't know that we can know, but it seems to be that when he says, "Hey, this guy blew his part of it, like whatever's left now is going to be going to me," I think that it's not really like secured by him yet. Like I don't think it's in his possession in that sense yet. I think it's all there because he's there working the land, and it's all like in his mind. That dude's gone. This is all mine now. I think that's the way he's thinking.
That makes sense.
And with regard to the father, which again is the most important thing, he does have a transactional view of his father too, to where it's like, okay, if I do the work, I get the payoff. Hey, he blew it. He's out. I'm still in. I'm still working hard. He's dutiful. He's disciplined. He looks good on the outside. He's got his act together. He's productive. And this guy's a schlep, right? That's what's happened, okay? So who is the more obvious rebel? This guy is the more obvious rebel. But as the story goes and what Jesus is teaching, and for those of you who weren't with us last week, let me just highlight, before Jesus tells the string of parables, it says in the audience there are the tax collectors and sinners and there are the Pharisees and scribes. Which ones are the more obvious sinners? The tax collectors and sinners are the more obvious sinners. There are then the goody-goodies who are productive and have their act together, and they are this guy. And as I've said before, and I'll just sort of look, there is misunderstanding of God going on in both these individuals. It is manifesting itself in different ways, but it's the same underneath it all. It's still the same. It's one, I value the stuff. The relationship is a means to getting the stuff, not the opposite. Not that stuff is sort of part of enriching the relationship. It's the relationship is a stepping stone to get to the stuff. That's the way it is. Humanly, that is your nature. In church land, often it's like, well, this is what becoming a Christian means. Becoming a Christian is, I'm not going to be this guy anymore. Now I'm going to be this guy. I didn't care about the rules and the laws of God. Now I'm going to start caring about the rules and the laws of God. I'm going to build a good moral life for myself, and God's going to reward me with an amazing marriage and responsible, obedient children and good health and whatever else it's going to look like. It's going to look nice, and it's going to be this great deal that I am happy with. Meanwhile, we are not clear regarding who God is. God loves a party. He loves a party. He's not stingy. He's not uptight like that guy is. He loves a party, and he loves a party in which the air in the room is the air of redemption. A party in which the celebration is surrounding the relationship with a proper or clear understanding of his heart, what he's really like. So much of what the world tells us is like this, is like, hey, that whole God thing is just going to rob your life of fun. You need to have pleasure, you need to have freedom, and you end up in the pigsty, guilt, empty, blah, blah, blah. Well, then the church comes along and says, oh, good, you're here? Come on over here. Be a good person. And then you get over that, and then the church is telling you, well, God's going to reward you if you just do this, and read your Bible, and pray this many times a week, and go to this men's meeting, and that event, and this seminar, and this. Then you can really get what you are after. It'll be a different type of pleasure. It's a little bit more blood, sweat, and tears. It goes into working to get it, but man, it's going to be rewarding in the end. And as I told you, in my own life, and I end up with people every week, all week long, I end up with church people who come to me and saying, it didn't work. Something's not working. And then when we start to talk about who God is, it's like, whoa. And it's either, boy, that's better than I didn't realize that was the point. Or it's like, well, that's, okay, great, but how do we get back on track with making this work? It's like, no, that's the point. And what Jesus is teaching, and by the way, embodying, because as he's there for a bunch of people who don't deserve it. He's there for a bunch of people who don't even realize it, but they're in the pigsty, all of them. Whether they look like they cleaned up the outside or not, they're all in the same plight. And he's there offering relationship, offering himself. So what is God like? He is gracious, kind, he's generous. In his household, there is provision. We're not, Ephesians 1, we're not cosmic orphans, we're adopted. We're under his care, we have what we need. He says, hey, I've always been, you've had me with you, I'm with you. From the garden, it's like, well, go it alone. We don't need God with us. God says, look, I'm coming to be with you. You need me with you. You need me with you. And all that is mine is yours. Every spiritual blessing in the heavenly places is yours in Christ Jesus.
That hits me with that, like I thought about that verse in John, where he says, in my Father's house are many rooms, if they want, so I will not hold you.
Yeah.
And he says, I go to prepare a place for you, that where I am, you may be also. Yeah. So he's like inviting his kids to come live with them, whereas it's like, I can't wait for mine to leave. And it's like, God's like,
please
stay remember, like,
please hit 18.
He's saying the exact opposite of everything we say to our kids, which is like, I want you to be dependent on me. My kids, I'm like, I want you to be very independent of me. Call me on the phone, tell me you're doing well. But like God's saying, come live in my house. By the way, here's this abundance of wealth.
Kids, we'll check back in with you when you need us to come, when you need to start taking care of us. When we need you to. Yeah.
So it's so starkly, it's night and day contrast between how God is and how we are.
Yeah.
but isn't it also true that God does these things so that we are in relationship with Him?
Absolutely.
And the instance where we're not in His house and we're independent means we're not in relationship with Him. And I think that's the thing that we miss so frequently when we look at this particular parable, is that we have both sons are out of relationship with their father.
Yeah. And the father is offering relationship to both sons.
Yes.
So this is now, and we only have like 10 minutes for this, okay? But this is now the segment we're going to call You Tell Me, all right? So I'm going to read to you some quotes. I'm going to keep these anonymous, but just to illustrate, and I want you to tell me how does what we just looked at and thought about connect, all right? So I read not long ago, and I included this in my project, I read this quote from there's a lot of deconversion stories these days, people abandoning, maybe people even in ministry, who have been in ministry for decades, people who have written books, who have abandoned faith, their church, abandoned everything, right? So this one's from a guy who was a pastor, and this is what his actual quote, okay, this is his exact quote. He says, "As an adult, my marriage was a sham and a constant source of pain for me. I did everything I was supposed to do. Marriage workshops, counseling, Bible reading together, date nights every week, marriage books. But my marriage never became what I was promised it would be." Okay, so you tell me.
Where is there?
And I'm not here to condemn this guy. I'm just what does what he's saying say about the character of God?
He has this conception that there's a certain way things are going to be, and that it's not, life is not set in stone, and he's got marriage set in stone, and God doesn't do that. Things go, and he surprises you here and there for a reason, I think, for growth.
As a leader in the church, both human nature goes this way, but then is there not a church culture which kind of reinforces, well, if you just do these things, then
here's the thing, this is what you want, and it looks like this is what God would want. It's a marriage that looks like Christ in the church. That's the goal, right? And here's how you get there. If you'll just do these things, if you'll just avail yourself of the books that are out there, and the sermon series that are out there, and the counseling that's out there, you will ascend to this level. That's the guarantee. We almost say it as a guarantee. And if you don't, then you're missing a step or something. You missed a book, a verse, a sermon. Sorry.
it's all right. Rose,
Did I step on somebody's?
No, I think you might have touched someone's Bible app, though, somehow.
Yeah.
Well, I can't remember. I think it might have been a youth pastor couple I was around or something else, and they were working with teenagers, and they were not fakey about their marriage, the time they spent with the teenagers. They were very real about showing that it's a process, And I think it's very hard to say that, God has blessed me with this wonderful marriage and, a lot of years and admit, that at times you're a crappy person and your marriage is crappy. So how do you reach that level of honesty? And God is sovereign. I wonder about, we were at a church years ago where the pastor was talking about another pastor, anonymously, but he said, this guy was like, wow, I could have been Billy Graham if I'd been married to Ruth Bell Graham. And it was like, why
I'm guessing he was sleeping on the couch that night.
Same thing on this. Is a person God's brought to you? What is missing? What do you think you should have that you don't have? Are you envying someone else's marriage, someone else's wife, their husband? I think a lot of it is traced to, well, look how good they brought it, and I don't, and I want that.
Right, and I want that. That's the key thing, right? It's like God is offering himself, and we're like, okay, yeah, that's cool, and yeah, I'll come sing the songs, and yeah, but really, and it's not just on some superficial level. I mean, you can, in my own personal life, part of my story is doing deep dives in seminary, 4 years of seminary, Hebrew, Greek, church history. I mean, just going for it, man. Like spiritual Navy SEAL guy, going for it. It's the way I viewed myself, right? Going for it. And it's like, it just takes some experiential upheaval in your life to help you see what you're really after. You think you're after God, kind of. You think you are, but you're really after stuff. And my point today is not to say, well, okay, so look inside, tinker around, and make that stop. Like, I'm telling you, that's your human nature. That's the old. That's the flesh. That's going to be with us till we're home. But the antidote for that is not then work. I'm going to pay God back by showing Him I really love Him. The antidote for that is God revealing His heart to you, unveiling. This is what I'm really like, and us seeing that and marveling over, wow, God, you're so much better than I thought you were. Your heart is richer and fuller and more generous and kind than I realized.
Jeff?
Yes.
Is that goal you started out with by Tozer?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. You just said it's you think you're after God, and I would say you are, and you were in fact after God. That's why it's so important that we have a clearing picture of who He is, because that's who you understood Him. You were after the God that you understood.
Right.
The view of God you understood.
Right.
Why that is so critical that we have a right. Because I've been in the same boat where if I just do these things, it reaches who He is.
Right.
Thinking the whole time I've got this right conception of Him.
Right. And I'm ordering my life rightly around that conception, and
Right.
even modeling or trying to emulate that.
That thing to shatter. That wasn't.
Joe?
Yes.
So I've been through a series of iterations in life. So I went from checking the box to not checking the box. Somewhere in there I decided that I needed to check the box of not checking the box.
Yeah.
You know?
Right. Like this guy still has boxes he's checking. Yeah.
Exactly.
They're a little sloppier in terms of how they're laid out.
So it's like, well, I don't want to be that guy, so I'm not going to check those boxes that I used to check, so I'm going to check the box of not checking the box. Right? But I'm still not. Ryan said it would be so hard to wrap your hands around, mind around how big that grace is.
Yeah.
For the prodigal, it's hard for me to wrap my mind around how big that grace is. And that, once you do that, there's no box, you know?
Yeah.
Because that only comes from Him manifest, those little photons.
Right.
Boom.
It's relationship.
Oh, man, I see how,
Yeah.
oh.
Yeah.
And there's no box to check there, and you don't even want a box because you're going, hey, that's God, you know? So I'm not saying, hey, I attained this, but I think there's a trap of, again, back to, I'm going to check the box of not checking the box. That's still me trying to get what I want, and I don't have to look at God.
Right.
I don't have to be wrapped in His grace, and I don't have to be dependent on His love.
Right.
I'll just do, I'll not do what I thought I was supposed to do.
Right. Well, that's where it just illustrates the human tendency is to be on the pendulum as it swings back and forth. And the hope for us, the greatest hope for us, is God's commitment to reveal Himself to us, to rescue us. And that's a good setup. And I had a couple other examples. We'll save them for another time. But that's a really good segue for what the message is going to be in Ephesians 4 this morning, because we're going to talk about how the Christian life is a life of renewal, and where Ephesians 4 talks about renewal, it's a passive idea. It's God is actively renewing us. He is renewing us. He is showing us what He's like. He's using obviously His Word to do that. He's using other people, other believers to do that. He's using life experience to do that. Even the hardest, especially the hardest stuff in life. He's using all that to show us our misunderstanding of Him, our mischaracterization, and what He's actually like. All right, let's wrap it up there. That was a good discussion. Can I get Greg? You mind closing us, man? Just close us in prayer here. We'll transition.
Father, thank You for for your Spirit, for your Word, for the Spirit's ministry in our life that convinces us of who you are.